Hello, and welcome to the eTech podcast with me, your host, Ryan Maughan. I have been involved in the development of electrified vehicles and machines since 2005 as an engineer and a business leader. This podcast is the product of my passion for electric and autonomous vehicle technology. I'm here to share knowledge from some of the world's leading experts, as well as my own insights. Join me as we accelerate the transition to cleaner, safer, and smarter vehicles and grow the industry around the world. So for today's show, I'm here with Mark Preston, and some of you will have heard of Mark before, some of you won't. Mark is an absolutely fascinating guy. He is the CEO of the DS TECHEETAH Formula E team, and if that's not enough, he's also the founder of an amazing company called StreetDrone, who are developing autonomous vehicle technology. So somehow, in his absolutely packed schedule, Mark has managed to find the time to take a few moments out to talk to me and make this episode of the podcast. So welcome, Mark.
Great to talk to you today, Ryan. It's going to be a fun chat.
Brilliant. So if we could get started, if you could just sort of tell everyone a bit about your background and how you got to do what you're doing now.
Sure. So I'm a mechanical engineer. I started in Australia a number of years ago. I worked for companies like GM and Holden Special Vehicles, which is like the AMG of GM in Australia. I came over to the UK in '96 to work in Formula One, where I started in Arrows Grand Prix at the time. I worked my way up there from being a stress engineer through to head of R&D. Then I went over to McLaren. So that was an interesting couple of years working at McLaren with people like Adrian Newey, which was absolutely fascinating. Then I decided to do my MBA at Oxford to kind of switch to the business side of the world a bit. I also decided to start a Formula One team at the same time. And we started Super Aguri Formula One team with Honda and Aguri Suzuki. And that was fun for a couple of years until sadly the financial crash in 2008 meant that most Japanese companies pulled out of Formula One at the time. I then went off and ran a composites company for a number of years, so carbon fiber manufacturing, but got involved in Formula E at the very beginning when Alejandro started the series, and have been in that series ever since. We've won a number of titles in the series, championships. And at the same time, myself and a friend of mine, Mike Potts, decided to look at another area we thought was interesting in the future, which was autonomous cars. And so we started StreetDrone, the autonomous car company, which Mike runs full time, and I support him in and around schedules with racing. So that brings you up to date, basically.
So that was a really, really quick trot through what is quite an amazing history. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit. So one of the things that I massively respect about you and actually really love about your history is you're a proper engineer. So you were like literally, you studied mechanical engineering. You then went into sort of being a real engineer in F1, etc. What was the sort of thing that what got you into engineering in the first place? What's the backstory there?
Yeah, so I suppose my grandfather was what they call a auto wrecker. I think in England it's a salvage merchant, I think is the right thing. So you take cars and pull them apart and sell the spare parts and that kind of thing. So he was one of those. My uncle was a farmer, and we went and lived on a farm when we were young in the middle of Australia. And so we used to fix trucks and drive cars and things around the farm. So always around people making things and especially cars. So that's kind of where I got, I think, my passion for mechanical and engineering.
Okay. And then that led you to go off and study it. And then, I mean, was Formula One a passion before that, or was it? What made you decide to go into F1 as a career?
I suppose actually, when I was at university, I did a fairly theoretical degree at Monash University in Melbourne. I wanted to do some sort of practical elements. So I actually found there was a race car company in Australia, not that far away from university, and I actually went and started to work with them in my spare time. and started to get sort of really into motor racing. I did things like programming simulations and doing stress analysis of the race cars. Um, and so I got involved in that Formula Fords. So in fact, we've got a crazy idea of maybe entering. There's a trophy called the Walter Hayes Trophy here in the UK for historic Formula Fords, and we're thinking about maybe running that race car, getting one of those race cars to do that event next year in sort of November time.
Oh wow.
But that's what got me involved in that. And then in about, I actually, myself and my colleague who still runs the company, it's called Ball and Racing Cars in Melbourne. We were looking at selling cars into Asia, and someone said to me, unless you can help my son get into Formula One, we wouldn't buy the race cars. So I
Right.
was like, so maybe I have to go to Formula One. And within about, I think it was about a month, a couple of motor racing journalists convinced me that before I was 27, I better get over to the UK. So I came out within about a month. I decided, right, I'll go there for 2 weeks or 2 years. And now, 25 years later, I'm still here doing motor racing.
And you managed. I mean, I think certainly. Well, it's a dream for a lot of people to get a job with a team like McLaren, what have you. So how did you open that first door? I think a lot of people would really love to know that.
Yeah, so I suppose because I did, well, maybe starting at the beginning, what I often tell students, because I sometimes do some presentations to Formula student teams and those kind of things. And I suppose I focused quite early on having skills that were new.
Right.
So at the time, stress analysis wasn't very well known. So that's figuring out how strong things are. So using computers and those kind of things. Um, I also did simulation. I wrote my own simulations. You couldn't buy them back then. You couldn't just go and buy one off the shelf. So I focused on things that were specialisms, which were sort of for the future. So that's the kind of focus I had. And then so I started doing Formula Fords in Australia. I got involved in touring cars, and when I came over to the UK, I actually did just send 10 letters to Formula One teams, companies like Lola, Arrows, McLaren, Ferrari, and all that. And I organised. I think I had about 8 interviews when I arrived.
Yeah.
That's why I thought basically Tom Walkinshaw had bought Arrows, the Formula One team, and the chief designer had to sort of step up to another level in a way, and he was the one that always did the stress analysis. So there was a very specialized job position, and because I'd done that stuff at GM and for race cars in Australia, it was kind of, I don't know, serendipity or whatever you want to call it, but I do believe that you've got to make your own opportunities, and when those opportunities arise, you've got to be ready to take them. And so I think that's what you call luck sometimes. Opportunity
Yeah.
meets a desire, and sometimes you get in. So I think you got to sort of focus and look at all the job ads that are coming up in the if you read things like Autosport and Motorsport, other motorsport magazines, and you start to see where the job types are. You can see the jobs sort of coming up, and compare your skills with what those job ads are.
Yeah.
Certainly nowadays, universities like Oxford Brookes, which is in Oxford here, is very close to quite a lot of Formula One teams. So I've hired people from Oxford Brookes, for example, over the years because they've done Formula Student, and Brookes has got a great motorsport program. So that's another route, I suppose,
Mm.
to motorsports.
I guess your sort of you had a huge amount of hands-on practical experience as well as the more theoretical side, which I think is a massive asset to anyone. It's all fine and well. I mean, I do believe degrees and that part is important, but I think a lot of young people get frustrated where they go and they study and they work really hard, but then they find it difficult to get a job afterwards, and particularly in an industry like F1 that's hyper competitive. But with all that practical experience as well, you would have been a really useful person that could have got straight into it and wouldn't have needed hand holding at all.
Yeah, exactly. And because I did a lot of things from scratch, like I wrote my own simulation from scratch, that forced me to actually learn all of the, the maths and why and everything behind the scenes as to why that was sort of how and why a simulation works. Um, so as I say, I think it's really, really good to specialize as much as you can, because
Mm.
when you're hiring a young person, you might say, I've got a job for someone to be a CAD designer. So what's the thing they need? Know how to use CAD,
Yeah,
Um, so having some sort of practical skills in a sort of a specialist way, I think is quite useful. So if wanted to be a tire engineer, for example, maybe you know how to do simulation of rubber or simulation of tires or things
yeah.
like that, but maybe some practical experience of working with tires in the Formula student team is always, I think, one of the best things.
Yeah, learning that in real life it looks a wee bit different to how it appears on a screen sometimes.
Yes.
And those gaps and clearances and how you're actually going to make that part and all that sort of thing. Yeah, it's and then so you kind of went through that time of being an employee and working and supporting some great teams there. It must have been a big step to go to setting up your own business of any sort. Huge risk and quite scary. And I've been through that myself a few times. Setting up your own Formula One team. I mean, a lot of people think I'm a bit crazy, and I wouldn't go there. So, um, why why? I guess is the first question, and then how? So, how on
Yeah.
earth did you pull that off at the time?
That was probably a bit nuts. I went and did the MBA, and I suppose I'd started off really early in my career back in Australia, where I wanted to be. I think at the time I wanted to be like Adrian Reynard and have a race car company like Reynard. That was the sort of goal back then. And so when I'd done Formula One for a number of years, and I had actually looked at starting a race team, another race team in Australia previously. So I suppose I was just going back to the original sort of the original idea. And I got together some guys that used to work at Arrows, and we started doing sort of plans for everything. And like everything, it was great fun and really interesting to try and understand everything you'd have to do to start a team.
Yeah,
We almost about to give up, and again, when opportunity meets preparation, you get luck, and the rules changed in Formula One in roughly 2005-6,
yeah,
when there was a possibility of running B teams, and so Honda was looking to run a B team, and so was Red Bull. Um, in the end, Red Bull bought Minardi, but Honda needed to set up a team from scratch, and we kind of had done all this planning and everything. And Aguri met us. He already had Honda and Bridgestone and the drivers and everything sorted out in Japan.
yeah,
And he met up with a guy called Daniel Odetto, who we'd worked with at Arrows previously, and he knew what we were up to. So everything just sort of came together. They needed certain things. They had the money, the engines, the drivers, the tires, all that sort of stuff, and we had a plan, and we knew exactly who we'd hire if something had happened, because we'd been planning it for the previous year.
yeah.
Well, while I was doing my executive MBA, actually, so I was kind of only going to the university 2 weeks every month and a half, roughly. So in the rest of the time, I was planning this. So yeah, that was a bit nuts and a
Loads of time
crazy.
to plan a Formula One team then.
Yeah, exactly. But pretty nuts, but great fun setting up something. It's really
Yeah,
and that experience has helped me. When we've been planning things for the autonomous car company, nothing seems impossible. When you've done something that seems impossible, then you just,
yeah,
someone said to me once, if you don't know what to do next, take small steps. Take smaller steps.
yeah,
Then things don't seem so insurmountable. Um, but starting the businesses that we've started recently, um, I got involved in the composites company after I did the Formula One team, and so I was sort of interested in private equity. Now I
Yeah.
haven't done that yet, but somebody said to me, "You haven't brought the checks through the door yet," and I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." So I went and ran this composites company with some German guys, and basically had to sell. And learning how to sell is interesting. You got to make sure you pay the bills and keep the work coming through the door. So that was probably the I don't know the final piece of the puzzle that I felt like I needed next, and that sort of landed me in good stead for the next
Wow.
things that we've done.
I tell you what, I mean, that really uh, strikes me that, even at that point in your career, so, you've done your sort of professional education, you've done like work for some really prestigious brands, you've done an absolutely nuts thing of setting up an F1 team, which, was, I think was a success in terms of what those teams were trying to do. And but then even still at that point, just as you're talking about it here, you're incredibly humble about it, and you're still seeing yourself as needing to learn and kind of grow as a person. I think a lot of people wouldn't have that kind of mindset, so it's that's really interesting. I think probably an important takeaway there.
I was interesting. I was just been sort of analyzing Tesla recently, just trying to understand a bit about why it's been so successful. And I came across a podcast about Agile, and I'd
Okay.
never I'd never learned Agile. I know I'm actually starting to teach myself a bit about Agile, and realize that actually it's the theories are something that we probably used in motorsports before, and now I'm sort of going through and trying to understand how to join up experiences in motorsport to how Agile works. So I can see it might be a competitive advantage to understand it a bit better and see if there's anything we could learn in the race team or the autonomous cars that come from Agile, for example, that might give us a
Yeah.
competitive advantage, because it seems to be one of the competitive advantages of Tesla. So yeah, you can't stop learning, can you?
No, the agile mindset's really yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, a lot of people come out of motorsport, and I think at the risk of not upsetting anyone, but I mean, I would say I probably had suffered from this. Some people know I've worked in motor racing for a number of years as well, pre doing what I do now, and I certainly came out with a bit of an arrogance. I think of, I've been here, I've done that, I'm great at building teams, and going to work in a proper company. So my mum always likes to say, "You got a proper job." It's like getting punched in the face. It was quite. I think F1 and motorsport is really complicated, really tough, really brutal in a lot of ways. But then it's really simple in other ways, in terms of motivating your people and getting everyone kind of organized. And a lot of companies have to spend a huge amount of time working out what their strategy is. And
Mm,
it's really simple in motorsport. You get the car on the start line and you try and win the race. And it's sort of, there isn't anything more complicated to it generally. So learning how to take that and make proper businesses, which are sometimes less clear, work is a real skill. It's interesting to see how you've done that. So then composites company, did that for a bit. You sort of get very
yes.
humble about that. But Formula E. So you were right in at the beginning of Formula E, and that, I can't even remember when that is. That's it's a few. It seems so new still, but what's it? We're season 6 now, 7,
We're up to 8. We're just about to start season 8.
8. Yeah.
I mean, I've in a presentation that I do. I know that you were involved in electric motors and everything really early on, and I remembered when I actually started to help Oxford Yassa Motors
Mm,
spin out of Oxford University. That was 2008,
yeah.
and I was sort of saying to people in my presentation that electric cars feel like they've just come alive. Let's say it's all starting to pick up,
Yeah.
it seems, but actually it's it's been sort of, I don't know, 12, 13 years since I started looking at it, and I think you were looking at it earlier than that,
Yeah.
weren't you? So it's amazing how long these things take to happen, right?
A 15-year
um
overnight success. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
because Tesla's been around for what is it, 18 years? I can't remember now. Um,
2006, I think, off the top of my
right.
head. So
Okay.
it's is it six or long?
It's,
Maybe it was six when Musk. I should know this because Tesla obviously existed pre Elon Musk. Because although some
yes.
people forget that as a company it was around for a while with founders, and he was revolutionizing the way we pay for stuff, and then he joined them. Um, yeah, it's a long time ago, and I mean back then
Mm,
they were working with Lotus and building cars
yeah.
on the Lotus platform, and there was a lot of activity in the UK on that. But I think even the people who were involved, some people saw it, but I remember at the time a lot of people were skeptical about this sort of project Lotus were working on, and it'll
Yeah.
never fly. And there's this really crazy, demanding American guy that comes in and asks us to make the doors close properly and the roof not leak and stuff like this. So um, it's a long time ago, and when Formula E came about, I mean, quite by accident, but my company did end up supplying into Spark. So we had components on pretty much every Formula E car, well, not every one in the first season. But it wasn't actually something that I think I tried to stay away from it because I was worried I would probably get too committed or too involved. So, but you managed, well, you're still there. You've managed to make a real success of Formula E. So, how have you managed that?
I think it's obviously many people will have watched the Formula One race on the weekend. It's amazing that the two top teams in F1 have been around for quite a long time.
Mm,
Mercedes is I think is the high performance engine company, has been around for sort of 18 years or something like that. So a lot of it I think is being in from the start and creating a stable team, understanding and being ahead of everybody in sort of incremental areas in all areas. At the end of the day, it's still a race car. It's an electric race car, but it's still a race car. It's still got dampers and tires, and there's still race strategy. Although the race strategy is different
mm,
than in a Formula One or internal combustion engine car. But yeah, I think a lot of the success is the teams. The drivers, Antonio, Jev. They're amazing guys. They push us really hard. An amazing group of engineers, and then all of the people around that support everybody, make sure bills are paid on time, and all those elements that stop people having to stress about stuff and just getting on with their jobs. So, sort of getting things out of the way of people, making sure they can get on with their jobs. But really, just a big, a great team with all the pieces of the puzzle. I must say that
yeah.
if you're missing one piece of the puzzle, you probably couldn't win in motor racing and probably sport in general, because there's 10, 12 other teams that are all being as competitive as you with lots of smart people.
And I mean, it's changed massively over the years as well. In the beginning, you guys, it was basically a standard car. You couldn't do all that much to the car, and you kind of were a race operation. Now you've got huge flexibility. You need massive competency in powertrain development, etc. So, how have you managed to stay at the front? Compared to some of the bigger names and budgets that have come into it.
Yeah, I mean, having worked in Formula One and seeing the areas that we spent money and potentially wasted money over the years that didn't really matter to the normal person on the street. We Alejandro did a great job. FI, the teams helped and worked on things. Took experiences from Formula One, other people that experienced, like Andretti's that experienced at IndyCar. People like the AB team had obviously done DTM. So everybody put their sort of heads together quite early on and said, these are the things that were bad about our series, or didn't control costs, etc. But these are the bits we should be spending all of our time on. So I think the future is automotive is, I think, what they're now calling a software-defined car.
Yeah.
So the focus in Formula E is definitely a lot of software.
Oh, right.
So the software is quite free. So we do a lot of work in simulators and on the software. And then the hardware side, obviously DS Automobiles does the powertrain.
Hmm.
So they have had all the engineers behind DS have done everything from the Citroen rally cars to the Peugeot Le Mans and all those kind of things. So they've got an incredibly diverse experience in race cars and powertrains. And they were in it from season 2. So again, they've learned along the way. I often ask them, do you think, way back then when you entered Formula E, did you think you'd have come this far? And most people say, no, actually, it's been incredible how much we've developed an electrical powertrain in these seasons. So I think some people don't realize that the powertrains themselves are different between the manufacturers
Yeah.
now. And so obviously DS does our powertrain, and you've got others in the series that also do their own powertrains. So focusing on the electrical powertrain and the software is kind of trying to make it as relevant to road cars as possible, and be able to learn things that can be taken over to road cars.
And could you tell us a bit about the powertrain? So what's actually sort of what is in a Formula E car?
Well, I'm not quite so good as you at the electronics of a Formula E car, but basically, obviously, electrical motor, inverters, software controllers to control the inverters in the electric motor.
Yeah.
The gearboxes are not multi-speed anymore. Basically, a kind of direct drive. That's something that changed from season 1. The season 1 car had a 5-speed gearbox, and
Yeah.
I remember at the time some of us had come from F1 and wondered if there's a trade-off between the quick shift gearboxes, was what we used to call them in F1, or the seamless shift gearboxes, whether or not they would be an advantage in Formula E. But as it's turned out, I think everybody is now running electrical motors with only gearboxes to drop down the RPMs to the wheels.
Yeah.
So that's in itself was a kind of, I'm not going to say innovation, but what's great about motor racing is, of course, every year not every year you can change the hardware. It's actually gone to a 2-year cycle now, but we can change the software quite often during the season, so that can be changed often.
Mm.
But the hardware changes every 2 years, and if you're, I always think, if you're designing a road car, you've got to design a road car for kind of 15, 20 years running on the road. So you've got to think very carefully about what you're developing, whereas a race car can effectively change every year, and in F1 it can even change quicker. So what's great about motor racing is that you can iterate and try things, and the fact that everybody's iterated to the same similar sort of layout,
Yeah.
but still doing a lot of work on software and all the details of how the powertrain works is quite incredible.
It's interesting that because they've sort of gradually brought in increasing technical freedom for the teams to at the beginning there was very little you could change, but and now there's more. There's still a few controlled items, isn't there? Although this
Yeah.
the battery pack is still controlled, isn't it? So that's a standard battery pack.
Yeah, we decided very early on that if the battery pack was free, it would drive the costs up too quickly of the series. And because the series is new, you need the audience and everyone to grow sort of at a great rate, obviously. But
Yeah.
you don't want to make it cost too much money. Otherwise, people can't afford to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, the batteries kept the same. The monocoques kept the same. Front suspension, but then the rear suspension, the inboard side can change because each manufacturer has their own gearboxes and casings.
Yeah.
But the outboard end is similar across the cars, because again, we decided as I suppose everybody together, FIA manufacturers and everybody, that there was no point in spending a lot of money on uprights and those things, which
Yeah.
they weren't going to change the world really. It was better to focus in on the things that really make it an electric racing car.
And initially, the cars didn't do regenerative braking, did they, using the motor? But they do now. Is that right? Or do they still don't do regen?
They were a bit limited at the beginning, but there was regeneration. I mean,
Yeah.
what's
Okay.
really exciting is that the next generation 3 of car, which comes in next season, that's got about, was it 150 kilowatts of regeneration on the front wheels
Ah.
and
Okay.
350 on the rear. So
Wow.
actually you're putting 600 kilowatts into the battery in regeneration, which is, oh, sorry, 500 kilowatts back into the battery. But that's incredible. That's like a 500 kilowatt charger, isn't it? That's what it's equivalent to in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So every time the driver brakes, there's an incredible amount of energy that goes into the battery. So that's quite exciting, and that's coming. Those cars will be seen, I think, in a few months' time in the middle of this season. So yeah, the regen is a really big element. I was just driving my electric car home from the airport, and in there's certain braking modes, it's quite good. You lift off the throttle, obviously, and you can
Yeah.
regenerate quite a lot of energy into the battery. So the similarities between the road and the race cars are quite interesting.
It's interesting that they've got it on the front as well. And I think I had spoken a couple of times about because in a race car, when you're braking, normally you brake quite hard, and actually the back end of the car goes relatively light, and all of the sort of braking effort is on the front wheels typically. But in the previous seasons with Formula E, the kind of dynamic balance of sort of actually doing all the regen at the back, but trying to keep the car so it handled properly, I believe was quite difficult. Talking to some of the engineers that I know, so it's seeing a higher level and on the front. Does that the system on the front actually put torque in as well? So you're driving through the front wheels, or is it just regenning?
It's just regen at the moment. I think maybe in the future they could consider having full drive maybe, but at the moment it's just the regen.
Oh wow, fascinating. And then on the motor side, on the cars, you rightly say everyone's kind of stepped away from the multi-speed transmissions. I think when a part of that, I think, is the circuits are all these sort of city circuits are quite twisty stuff. But I'm right in thinking the motors have all gone to quite high speed. So you're going really fast on your motor with a reduction gear down to the wheels. Is that about right, basically? So
Yeah.
20,000 RPM motors and things like that.
Over the years, everyone's figured out the optimization, and you probably be able to answer this better than me, but I also understand probably more capability in the power electronics to
Yeah.
adjust things between low and high speed of the engine, and therefore get better kind of torque response over the whole range. More probably quicker than everyone had expected, maybe, because that's obviously the idea of a gearbox to
Yeah.
keep the motor in its sweet spot. But I think electronics has developed very well over the last years, and that's where kind of a lot of the secret sauce is in the power electronics, and obviously the software that controls it. So
Yeah.
makes it all relevant to road cars. All of the techniques and processes developed in motor racing can be used to support design of a road car.
So you mentioned that season 8 is bringing regen braking on the front and more powerful regen braking on the back. What else? What else is coming with season 8? What else is it bringing?
So obviously, always sustainable increases in sustainability, because obviously we push the fact that we're obviously, and we're not obviously, but we've been net zero carbon since inception, because from the very beginning, the FIA and Formula E have been focusing on making sure that the sport is sustainable in all elements. The new car, I think that the basically thoughts is that it will you'll have to regenerate 40% of the energy during a race, which is quite incredible. So the drivers have to regenerate quite a lot of energy in the race, otherwise they won't finish. So
Oh wow.
that's interesting.
Mm.
So the car's a bit lighter. It obviously can be faster, but the tracks are not changing dramatically. And I suppose one of the interesting ones is that you won't have rear hydraulic brakes. So it's going to be all based on regeneration at the rear. So that's going to be fascinating. I don't know of any other cars that's been done in before. Maybe it has been done somewhere that I didn't know about, but that'll
Oh
be
wow.
quite fascinating as well.
So that just there's no mechanical braking system on the back axle other than the regen in the
Yes,
in the primary
correct.
traction motor. Wow, that is
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. It's I guess there's a lot of power there And it is that thing probably where you don't need it. It must be quite hard actually for the drivers to sort of modulate the brake pedal enough to get effective regen rather than just diving into the hydraulic brakes all the time.
Although when they brake, they first sort of lift the throttle and that they coast for a little bit, and they pull the paddles on the steering wheel, which then regenerates to the rear at the moment, and obviously that'll be the same for the front in the future. And then eventually they touch the brakes and blend the sort of brakes between the regeneration and the physical brakes. So yeah, there's a lot of
Oh wow.
technology that obviously DS works on, having experienced things in rally cars and other things in that way. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into getting the car balance right, obviously, and then just being able to regenerate enough energy to finish the race, basically.
I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Yes.
I wouldn't envy, having to cope with other drivers bobbing and weaving around you, but then a bit like flying a helicopter, left hand, right
Yeah.
hand.
Yes. Yeah. I always sort of say that the workload's quite high in Formula E. The other element is that it's usually done over one day. Sometimes we have 2 day races, but you have to arrive in the morning. You only get a small practice sessions. You can't crash the car. Well, you can of course crash the car, but if you do, it messes up the rest of your
You're
day.
done, yeah.
You find that even if the mechanics and everybody gets the car fixed and ready to go, the flow of the day is interrupted almost too much.
Yeah.
It's not often that that sort of thing happens and someone can get back to the very front, especially as it's over one day. And it's not like you crash it on a Friday and then maybe fix the car and then you get to run another session and then check it out in the next session the next day, and then obviously qualifying. So
Yeah.
yeah, having it all in one day makes the drivers, they have to sort of be on it
A bit
from the
disciplined.
beginning, and yeah, and then come up to speed really fast, and then not making any mistakes, and delivering the race, which is a high and with a higher workload, like you're just saying about all these different adjustments they can make to all of the regeneration and the brakes
Mm.
and everything is quite incredible.
Yeah, having been the guy repairing bits of composites in his hotel bedroom at night, and working all nighters on cars and stuff at tracks, I quite like the sound of that actually. Can't
Yes,
bin it in testing or qualifying and then expect to have it back on the grid again. So yeah, that's it's quite different to how it is in other race series. So
indeed.
season 8 is going to be uh, really exciting. I think. I mean, it's really interesting how Formula E has grown as sort of a product and a brand, and compared to Formula One, even I think because it's very different, obviously, completely different budgets and different tracks, and but it's got a bit of a strong following, Formula E in out there in the world, and whereas Formula One just kind of still it's struggling, really. I think to stay relevant, it feels like Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Formula One has, we all know, had a lot of success with Drive to Survive. That's brought a lot of new fans, especially in America and stuff, to Formula One. It's been obviously an exciting season this year. But yeah, it's still bigger because it's been going for however long it's been going. So Formula E only obviously started at sort of 7 years or so ago, as we discussed earlier. So it takes time to get people to know that it's there and understand it. So awareness and those kind of things is all important. But certainly, yeah, staying relevant is quite a hard situation. Obviously, as the world changes to, it seems anyway, EVs at a faster and faster pace.
Yeah.
Relevance is always key, I think. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in F1 over the
Yeah,
next few years.
certainly. And I mean, manufacturers, where manufacturers put their effort, and even the whole
Yeah,
concept of people, relatively affluent people, on make a bit of money, used to go out and buy a loud, brash car, and actually that people aren't tending to do that sort of thing anymore, and I think that's bit of a challenge in terms of the. So I think someone called it considerate consumerism. I think is the new thing.
Okay.
So changes everything really.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's going to be fascinating this next few years.
See how it goes. Yeah. So you mentioned Mike earlier, and we sort of talked about all the motorsporty stuff, but just want to tell me a bit about StreetDrone and kind of where that kind of came into being in amongst all of this.
Yeah, it's funny because somebody, and I think it was about sort of 8 years ago now, someone asked us to have a look at doing a platform for some autonomous car development. And because they knew we'd built race cars and done all those kind of crazy programs and stuff, and knew that we knew enough to do it ourselves. So they asked us to do something, and we looked at some ideas, and we came up with using the Twizy as a development platform because its price, its size, its electric, etc. That would seem like a good thing. So we started to make a car, and then we were able to sell a car to a few initial customers, sort of 6 years ago or so. And so StreetDrone was born at that point. And so Mike Potts, he's a partner in the business, and he runs it from day to day. And that sort of just grown and grown. We then did a Nissan ENV200, again electric, a van that has variants. It could be a taxi, because it's taxi variants of that car. Could be a delivery vehicle. Could also be a 7-seater. So it's got room in the back for engineers to sit in the back and monitor things while the cars are being tested. Those cars are around the world, as far as Australia, Hong Kong, and then closer here in Europe, in Germany, France, places like that. So a number of the cars are at universities around the world, development centres in the UK, especially for testing autonomous technology. We started to do an open source software for the autonomous driving, which is called Project Aslan, ASLAN. So you can see that on GitHub and other things. So students can get involved in the autonomous software. And then more recently, we raised some more money recently from Wilco, which is the hardware high street retailer, to look at the future of last mile deliveries and also what we're calling first mile deliveries. So we're doing a big project up at Nissan Sunderland, which is really interesting, where we take a Terberg terminal tractor. It's electric, and it pulls what's going to pull HGV or semi-trailers from one part of the Nissan plant to another. So we're calling that kind of the first mile in some ways of
Yeah.
a journey, let's say. And then we're looking at a small vehicle based on something like the Twizy to be a last mile delivery vehicle from in neighborhoods is where we're focusing. So focusing in that sort of last mile area in a sort of radius of around sort of 2-3 kilometers around a high street.
And what was it that, I mean, I almost sort of know the answer, but I'm going to ask this because obviously the guy who decided to set up his own Formula One team. So the idea of taking on the Silicon Valley, billionaires at their own game with an autonomous vehicle, all of the money that's flowed into autonomous vehicle development around the world. What were you thinking?
Well, we sort of started by thinking we might be just an R&D company, but then as time's gone on, those guys are focusing on the big markets. So they're focusing on robo-taxis, basically, which if you look at the road car market, there's 80 million road cars sold a year. And theoretically, those cars, or at least their starting position was always they'll be able to level 5 autonomy, drive anywhere, from anywhere to anywhere. I think people are starting to realize that's maybe not as easy as everyone thought at the beginning. But we've been sort of, as typical engineers, thinking, what's the real market? What's the real market that's nearer term that those guys won't want to play in? So we sort of started to focus down on, the first mile deliveries and the last mile deliveries, going only 20 miles an hour. We've said 20 is plenty. So we've said we'll be focusing on because most streets in our cities are now going to 20 miles an hour, so maximum 20 miles an hour. So again, we start to really limit down the variables. So we're not trying to drive it everywhere at maximum speeds on motorways. Let's leave that up to Mercedes, Waymo, all those companies.
Yeah.
We focus down on the customer. So focus down on what are we really trying to build, building things for the customer, not just building technology for technology's sake, trying to find markets that fit with autonomy. A lot smaller markets, I suppose, in some ways than the robo-taxi market, but still quite large when you think of how used to these last-minute deliveries will become after obviously going through COVID lockdown periods. So yeah, we're not trying to compete with the Waymos of the world. And as Mike often says to me, he came from the advertising business actually, and there's so many players. As the market grows, there'll be room for a lot of people in this market because the markets are so big. So maybe in the end, we only do a small niche as we start to find the product market fit of the stuff we're developing, and we may start to focus down on a particular market. And I'm sure there'll be competitors, but it'll be a pretty big market.
Yeah. Wow. So thinking about, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Thinking about everything that you do, and everything that's going on in the world with autonomy and EVs and stuff like that. What are you most looking forward to in the next couple of years?
Yeah, what's the most interesting things? I mean, obviously with Formula E, it's quite exciting to do these really interesting big jumps in EV. So the differences in the technology of the next Formula E car is quite exciting. That's really starting to help to find the future, and probably will start to have more of an influence on road cars. And obviously trying to find the right product market fit, although we think we have with the autonomous vehicles, and really get some products out there on the roads as we work with the governments and others to allow level 4, we call level 4 autonomous vehicles to run on the roads. A lot of work still to be done, but there's some exciting things coming up.
Fantastic. We'll call it a day at that, because we're actually over time slightly in terms of appreciate you've got an absolute ton of stuff to get on with all of the roles that you've got and things you've got going on. So thank you so much for taking the time out, Mark, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
Enjoyed doing it. Thanks very much for inviting me on, Ryan.
Brilliant.